All right, everyone, we're going to get started today. Welcome again to WellRight's webinar series for September. And September is focused on nutrition. This is the fourth event in our series this month. And once again, I'm going to go through some housekeeping notes so everyone's on the same page. Your audio can be you can listen to the audio on the web through your computer speakers or through the phone. If you're on the web and having some problems hearing it, you can try dialing in. The dial-in's under the control panel, under the audio section. You just have to hit the triangle next to audio to expand that. Switch from mic and speakers to telephone, and there's a dial-in number right there. Everyone will be muted during the duration of the call today. Questions can be taken through the GoToMeeting, however. You can submit those right through the control panel under the questions section. So again, hit that little triangle to expand that section. And go ahead and type that question in, and we will take them at any time. Regardless of the timing, we'll just go ahead and stop and address that, so please send them along at any time. Also, we are recording this event too. This one will also be up on our YouTube page, so we'll make that accessible shortly after today. All right, once again, Coach Michael's back with yet another topic that we're excited to hear about.
All right, thanks, Jackie, and everyone, thanks for tuning in again. Like Jackie said, this is the fourth of a four-part food series, and it's called Ingredients, the Good, the Bad, the Ugly. And with me again is my favorite co-host, Ms. Kristen Slins.
Hi, everybody.
So once again, thanks for joining us. And, you know, today with ingredients, what we're talking about is, you know, what goes into food? You know, what makes it taste good? What do we season with? What are food manufacturers putting in there? And I think the last time I looked, and someone have to quote me on this, but I think the FDA permits like 3,000 some different food ingredients. And so, like, how do you do a small slide of 3,000 ingredients? So what I chose today to do was just focus on a few, some popular ones, some things you see in the news a lot, and I think we're going to get down to some nitty-gritty, some good stuff. On an unrelated note, but food-related nonetheless, someone in our office brought in Michigan Concord grapes, so I want to thank that person. I've never had them before, but they're the most delicious grapes I've ever eaten in my entire life. If anyone who's listening on this call has never had Michigan Concord grapes, unbelievable. So
I'd have to agree. I've had a few this morning myself.
Oh, man, are they good. Okay, so without further ado, as always, in the last three series, I do like a little bit of a big picture, and we're going to kind of breeze through this one. So there's some good. When it comes to ingredients, there's some natural stuff, really good stuff that we're used to putting in, probably what Mom and Grandma used to put in there, some spices, some herbs, you know, and not all things that are added to food's bad. So, but then there is some bad. There's not so great stuff that's a little bit controversial. We're going to kind of focus on some of that today. And then there's the ugly, which typically is not as bad as what the media may speculate. In truth, most of it's either kind of good or bad. There's not things typically that are so outrageously horrible. But we're going to kind of focus on this sort of barrier between good and bad. And I think it'll be a pretty good presentation here. So let's talk about ingredients, the usual suspects, things, Kristen, that you're probably used to cooking with because you're Miss Natural, so you do good. And what we're talking about, you know, vinegar, honey, herbs, vanilla, pepper, salt. When we say food additives, when we say ingredients, things that are added to food, most people don't think about this kind of stuff, but this stuff ends up on our packages too. But this is the good stuff. You know, this is, when you see this end up on an ingredient label, you're probably in pretty good hands. This is stuff we've been using for tens of thousands of years, and they are fantastic. So when you hear me talk about something bad or negative when it comes to ingredients, I'm not indicating any of these. And this list could have been much longer. I just wanted to give you 7 examples. So we're going to kind of kick this off with a little bit of myth. Truth. I think it's always kind of fun. So natural flavors are better than artificial flavors. Before we kind of dive into it, want to talk about this for a second. So natural flavor per the FDA is basically anything that's derived from a plant, animal, anything natural from produce, agriculture, water, you name it. This is natural, and I do mean anything. Artificial is the exact opposite. It's made in a laboratory. It's probably chemically made or chemically altered. So probably right away you say, natural flavor better. No chemistry, no laboratory, no biology, no white coats. Got to be better. I don't know, Kristen, before we kind of dig into this, and just so you know, Kristen hasn't really seen much of this, so she doesn't know what it's going to be, but, what do you think?
Well, my heart wants to tell me yes, but knowing you, I'm going to have to say false.
Okay. Well, so it's false, and let me give you some examples of why. So if you were to give me a laboratory, let's say vanilla, okay, let's do that. You give me a laboratory vanilla and you give me a natural vanilla. And if I get my chemistry lab coat on and I've got a microscope available to me and I put them both underneath the lens, they're both going to have the same thing. Chemically, they're going to be very, very similar. Now, I'm not a chemist, but from most of the literature that I've seen, most artificial flavors, they mimic natural flavors almost to the T. Like an example, strawberry. So to you, ethyl methylphenol glycidate means nothing, right? You're like, what, huh? But what that is that's what makes a strawberry taste like a strawberry. So a food chemist, he's going to come and he's going to say, okay, it costs a lot of money for me to go in nature and find strawberry. So I will take that exact same compound, atom for atom, chemical for chemical, and I will make it. And it'll taste just like strawberry. So they're not different chemically, structurally. They're not much different at all. And here's the other thing about artificial flavors, because it has to go through the FDA, really they're regulated incredibly stringent, much more so than natural flavors. Like I was talking to one of my coworkers today, and we were talking about weird things that end up in food, like shellac, a natural flavor. And if you know what that is, that's the shine that goes on a jelly bean. Well, what they get that is the dung from a dung beetle. That's actually what makes candy shiny. So it's the excrement from a dung beetle. And that's a natural flavor. Delicious. I would totally be okay if maybe artificially created that without having to get that from a dung beetle. But that's just sort of a weird example. But the bottom line is that chemically they're much the same, and many times, even in nature, natural things aren't always the best for you. So that kind of goes there. So this one, true or false, artificial coloring is safe. This one was interesting as you start to research it, especially recently as our CEO Tad and I, we were writing some literature and some content, and we came across this artificial coloring, and I hadn't given it much thought in the past. And then when you start to really look at it, this is sort of an interesting one. So I don't know, Kristen, what do you think? Did you have any history with it? Do you have any thoughts on it? About, artificial colorings, or do you, try your best to stay away from it?
I do.
Just naturally?
Naturally I do, because, like I said before, in my heart, I like to stay as true as possible. So when I'm in a position where I'm grocery shopping, or maybe time is cut short, and I'm not going to prepare everything from full scratch ingredients out of my refrigerator, if I'm buying anything prepackaged, I like to limit the ingredient list to 5 or less.
That's pretty tough.
And that is very tough.
So, and that includes colors, anything added to it, stabilizers, emulsifiers, you name it, everything.
Yeah.
So if it says salt and vinegar and caramel, that's 3, including the product. Okay. That is not easy.
It's not easy.
That's good.
But I challenge everyone out there, 5 ingredients or less.
Okay, well, here's what we'll say. I think you're on the right path. So artificial colors, they're not safe. Let's kind of talk about this, and I want to show you something. So in especially American food, the way it gets regulated is there's real color, right? There's real natural food color, which is fruits, vegetables, the pigments and dyes from skins. All that stuff is natural, but Unfortunately, most food is not colored with this. What most food is colored with is FD&C. And so what this is, and you've probably seen this on the back of labels, like go to the store, pick up a liquid like Gatorade or Powerade or Monster or any of those like pre-formulated drinks that aren't water, you're going to see FD&C generally. You're going to see lots of food coloring in these liquids. And the thing is that yes, did the FDA pass them? It did. But this is one of the things in food that are, it's one of the most controversial things because there are many countries around the world that have banned most of these. And maybe we're behind the ball, maybe we're not, maybe there's things that legislators and the FDA know that I don't. Much of this testing has been done on animals. There's been some cancer scares with a lot of this stuff. And the one thing that kind of makes me, I don't know, throw my hat in the ring of people who stay away from this is like, I'll just read you off a list of some. FD&C red number 2, red number 4, red number 32, orange number 1, orange number 2, yellow 1, 2, 3, and 4, violet number 1. All of these have been banned, right? So now these, the big 7 that I've got up here, these are still out there. They just haven't been banned yet, but many other countries have banned them. So I don't know if in America we're behind the ball a little bit. I won't go through each one and say what each one causes because you can see that up there. There's some health risks. There's some examples. There's some different prevalence of each one. Like blue 1 and 2, they're really, really prevalent. The FD&C reds, anything that's like red, if you have children or you drink like red liquids, see if it's got FD&C red on it because that one's really, really up for debate right now, and it's really prevalent. So that's just a little tip for you. You know, try and stay away from the reds. I am totally open to literature to prove me wrong, but some of the things I've been looking at says that this maybe isn't the best choice. So, Chris, I think you're like on the right path there.
Yeah. Well, and further too to your point about the FDA, and I don't want to down our FDA, but I think we are a little behind the times because when you look like in Europe, there was a study in 2007, the Southampton 6, which were some of these key artificial colorings. And the one thing that I've kind of looked into a little further is there are natural alternatives that are going to still give the color, I guess, if that's aesthetically more pleasing to how we're consuming our food. So again, back to your point, I guess just read the labels.
And you know, you bring up a good point too, because in America, since about 1900, we've had this weird fascination with color. Like salt, why does it have to be white? Sugar, why does it have to be white? None of these compounds start that way. Liquid, like if you had a sports drink, would it taste any different if it wasn't colored red or purple or violet? If you didn't have to have this compound, because these artificial colors, they add no flavor. They don't add any benefit other than just visual appeal. And you almost wonder, like, are they just marketing it to like kids? Is it just a marketing gimmick to get people to buy this stuff because it's pretty? You know, I don't know.
I know, I feel the same way. You walk in the grocery store and you see even like in the meat section and the steak that's just as ruby red as the package that it comes in, and you have to kind of wonder. I mean, there's going to be a level of oxidation at some point in time, but you know, again, for me, it's always been the further we take that original article of food, the further away the more we have to start using artificial colors and preservatives. So again, the 5 ingredients or less rule for me, the more I start to research the food and that I'm consuming and that I'm feeding and providing for my kids, like, you know, Skittles and M&Ms are one of the worst culprits, and I'm sure we're all guilty of letting our kids eat Skittles and M&Ms.
And I'm sure they have FD&C every single one on the list, right? Because there's like 16 colors. So
another one that I think is a common piece of food in our cabinets, and I can say that myself and my kids have both eaten Kraft macaroni and cheese, but they have 17.6 milligrams of artificial dyes per serving.
17.6. Wow.
Anyway.
That's a lot.
That's something that can be made from scratch.
Right.
And we don't need those artificial.
I know, exactly. It's something that's easy to make from scratch too.
Yeah.
Like it's probably the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Yeah, I don't know, guys. I think food coloring, if it's artificial, I think that's maybe one that we try and stay away from if we can. Here's an interesting one. So, true or false, nitrates are bad for you, and you know we associate nitrates, nitrites with processed meat typically, right? So, Kristen, I mean, what do you think? Like, do you have any thoughts on it? I mean, do you have an inclination where we're going?
Yeah, I feel strongly that nitrates are bad for you.
Okay.
And I stay away from them. And my daughter is now almost 25, and she's actually also a mother, that I'm proud to say, but her doctor advised her not to eat any processed meats at all.
Okay. Was it for the salt, or was it because of the nitrates?
Because of the nitrates.
Okay.
So she's with child. Her doctor's telling her not to eat them. For myself, I've always had some acute issues as a result of the Chinese takeout, whether I try to find the most natural place around. My hands swell, my eyes swell, I'll wake up in the morning. Since those are I don't have the headache or any other symptoms, but for me, I just try to stay away from it. And then I felt reassured knowing that my daughter's doctor advised her also to stay away from it. It's a preservative.
Maybe we can like go into that and see kind of why he would have done that.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So this is going to surprise people. Nitrates in themselves are not bad for you. All right, that's going to rattle some people. If there's any doctors on the phone listening, like I think you'll understand where we're coming from here. But the body endogenously, or what's also known as it just creates it. The body actually creates nitrates. Salivary nitrates. Your saliva actually creates even far more than you're going to find in processed food. What's interesting, back in the 1970s is like researchers were actually trying to figure out what nitrates was all about. They're like, okay, why does the body produce them? Why would we even need them? One of the things as we started to go through like the 1980s and the 1990s with medical research is actually nitrates help us produce nitric oxide, which they have found may actually help cardiovascular disease. It's actually been shown to improve insulin response in diabetics. Like there's been a whole host of interesting things that happen. So we know that our body knows how to deal with them. And to give you guys kind of a little snapshot of science and how it works is nitrates and nitrites. So those of you that are listening and say, wait, okay, he keeps saying nitrates, but then I hear nitrite. So nitrates are common in food, but not nearly as common as nitrite. So they're different. But when nitrate hits the body, it'll convert it into nitrite. That's all that is. It's just a little conversion, but they're pretty close and they're pretty similar, right? And so one of the things that ends up happening, and here's where the doctors start to recommend staying away from it. It's not just because nitrate or nitrite's a salt. That's what people think initially, like, well, it's a salt, you've got to stay away from it, right? It's a preservative. What ends up happening is that when nitrite goes into the body, when it incurs an acidic environment, think of like your stomach acid or high cooking temperatures, it combines with protein and it makes something called nitrosamine. And this is what's been linked to cancer, especially for men. It's been linked in a lot of literature, and that's where they say, like if you hear like red meat research, bacon research, pork research for cancer, a lot of it's about the nitrosamines. And much of the studies, they're not controlled, they're not peer-reviewed, or not, I wouldn't say peer-reviewed, but they're not isolated so we actually know that that's what's causing it. But the bottom line for this is nitrates, your body knows what to do with them, but they're sort of everywhere. So they're in vegetables. Vegetables have nitrates in them. I know that's kind of weird, right? It's like, well, I thought it was only meat. No, actually vegetables have them too. Drinking water has a lot because agriculture uses them. So we know that we get them sort of everywhere. And so the thing that I tell people, here's like kind of my 2 cents on it. Is nitrates in food the most horrific thing in the world? No. But if you know you're getting some in vegetables, and you know your body's sort of creating some already, and you know there's some in drinking water, do you need them in processed meats too, right? At some point there's going to be a little bit of a toxic overload with this stuff. And so I just tell people, look, if you can stay away from processed meats, we don't even have to have the argument anymore, right? It's just like, just stay away from it, and we don't have to go through all the chemistry of what's happening in the body. So I kind of tell people, bottom line, nitrates in themselves are not horrible for you, but we get them in so many other places, you just don't need them in processed meat, right? So, and here's our nutrition spotlight for the week. MSG. So I saw a Live Science article recently, and basically the headline was, actually, MSG is not safe for everyone. And you hear a lot of like MSG scaring, and so my thought today was, well, I could really go over MSG. I mean, really, really go over it. But I think it deserves sort of like its own webinar in itself, because it's a really, really complicated subject. Kristen, I don't know, what do you think about MSG? I know one day I remember we were talking and you were like, I'll just stay away from that stuff.
I do. And, I think because there is that health scare out there, outside of, the acute swelling or this or that, but there's, the chronic disease factor that's associated with it. Ultimately, brain damage, possibly.
Yeah, quote unquote, right?
Quote unquote, possibly.
And I think the one thing too is I've been seeing a lot of research where researchers, especially Dr. John Erb, he's out of the University of Waterloo. He's talking about obesity. Like he can initiate obesity in animals extremely quickly with MSG, not even changing their diet. So there's some interesting things out there about it. I don't know, is that like what you're referring to with some of the, the disease implications?
Yeah, and again, I read it on the surface, and all I need to hear, again, is that quote unquote possibly. So why take a chance when there's a possibility? So. Yeah.
No, I get that. I'll say this. Let me play devil's advocate for a moment. I like being this guy. MSG, it's glutamic acid is what it is, and it's a non-essential amino acid. So it occurs all over nature. I'm talking everything from dairy to seaweed, breast milk. So yeah, your baby actually has glutamic acid. And what they're thinking with the whole breast milk thing is that there's something in the amino acid that it encourages babies to drink. So it's kind of interesting. Well, not MSG, but glutamic acid is made in the brain. So the body has uses for it. And the body produces it for really, really, really important functions, especially nerve impulses. So our body knows what to do with it, but let me just address it on the Chinese food, right? So there's this thing called Chinese food syndrome. It's real. It's like legitimate. And if you've ever heard someone say, yeah, I can't have any MSG because I get a headache, right? Or I can't have this specific food because I get sick or I don't feel good. It may be legitimate, actually. Like research shows that some people are really, really sensitive to it. But these same people are probably also sensitive to some of the other foods that it's in. So it's one of those things like if you are really sensitive to MSG and you are, then you might be sensitive to cheeses and tomatoes and milk and eggs. Like those could also be sensitivities to you because they also have glutamic acid, which is essentially MSG. So
can I interject something?
Yeah.
So in those cases, the cheese and the other things, they're in a whole state.
You're right.
So when you go to a Chinese restaurant and you order, that's an artificial state. So then from both situations, wouldn't it be a better version of MSG?
Well, yeah, so that's the argument in chemistry is, when it comes in its natural state and it comes in dairy, let's just say, it's bound glutamic acid, which means that when the amino acid hits your body, that protein can find other proteins and it can work together for the better good of everyone. So your body is like okay with it. But like what's the deal with free glutamic acid, which is what the artificial stuff is, right? And so that's sort of where we're going. And to be perfectly honest, I'll say to you, I don't think nutrition research is there yet. And so what I kind of tell my own clients and people is, you know what, it may not be as bad for us as we think it is, but it's not something that I would just go and add if you don't have to. Because it's almost like artificial sweeteners. They haven't been around long enough for us to really know the implications. Like what are we talking about? Because most nutrition research is done on animals. And they're giving extraordinary doses that humans would never incur. So I just say, you know what, it's probably not as bad as we think it is, but it's maybe not something that you should go out looking for. So I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to say, yeah, maybe don't maybe if you can go to a Chinese restaurant and say no MSG, you're not going to miss out on anything, right? So, and for those of you who just need the Spark Notes version MSG, it's a flavor enhancer. It's called Unami, basically. In Japanese, it's basically called that because it enhances like a hearty texture. It makes food taste heartier. So that's why they put it in there. It makes everything really exciting in your taste buds. And so, bottom line, here we go. Let's cap this up. This is Coach Mike's habit. So, number one, just kick out the artificial food coloring. If you see the FD&C on there, I don't think research is there to support that you should have them. So if you can do without artificial coloring, just knock that out. You don't need sports drinks. You don't need stuff that's colored just to, make it look better. I would just kick that stuff out if you could. Buy fresh meat. It's going to taste better. You don't need it smoked and crisp and fried and all that. You really don't need all that stuff. I know we talked about, some of the things that go into meat today. And really, I don't know. I think we just need more time to research this stuff. So I would say buy it fresh. Okay, here's one I didn't talk about. Have some greens and peppers with your food. All right, so here's what's kind of interesting for you guys, a cool little fact. Vitamin C, which is really heavy in greens and peppers, it actually works to mitigate the effects of MSG, and it also works to mitigate the effects of nitrates. So it neutralizes them in the body. So if you're going to go out to a Chinese restaurant, someone's treating you to dinner and you don't want to be rude and you're like, oh man, MSG, I think I get a headache from it, I don't want it. Order like a side of greens. Order some peppers. And actually that can actually help to mitigate some of the effects. And the same goes for processed meats. If you're out in a place and you don't normally eat processed meats and someone serves it to you, see if there's some vegetables around. Because actually vitamin C can kind of counteract it. It's like, the Batman to the Joker. So it's kind of good. And then last but not least, if you eat real food, it'll eliminate most issues automatically. So everything we talked about was like, what does research say? What do food chemists say? What does it actually do? We could argue about this for years. People get PhDs in nitrates, right? But at the end of the day, if you eat real food, you don't even have to worry about it. So that's kind of my 2 cents. I don't know if there's anything, Kristen, that you wanted to add, just kind of about everything.
No, I agree, and I'm trying to do that, and I know we all get so busy in our everyday lives. But I think the closer to the natural state of our food that we're eating and drinking, the better off we're going to be. But I know it's not always the easiest. People want their sodas and they want their extra little things, and I think again, everything in moderation. So.
Totally, I agree.
All right. Well, we're going to open it up for some questions. Everyone, if you have a question, just go ahead and type it into the control panel section of the meeting under the questions section, and we'll answer those. But I actually have one for Kristen. So you mentioned your 5-ingredient rule. Maybe this isn't a question, but more like advice, I guess, on shopping. So that is very hard. It's difficult. So are there tips on maybe where to shop or I don't know, what you gravitate towards in the stores?
Well, we're here in Chicago. Trader Joe's is affordable, and I feel like some of the best options when it comes to prepared food. That's typically my go-to. When I think Annie's is a brand for mac and cheese, and I think that is like a staple American meal for a lot of us, whether it's for lunch or dinner. But that's typically my go-to. I can't rattle off what all the exact ingredients are off the top of my head, but I feel pretty safe there, and even Whole Foods. It's maybe a little bit more expensive, but I think they're actually trying to become more competitive with offering discounts on if you spend $50, you get $10 off. So I just try to have some of those basic items around so that I don't have to reach or even order out the Chinese carryout for something worse.
If I can add something to that too, Kristen, because it made me think, when I was first starting off on the health thing, someone else told me, try to do 4 ingredients or less. And it was really intimidating, especially for people who don't live near Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. So the one thing I tell my clients now, and this is kind of how I live too, if you can't do the 5, because that's really elite. Like it takes some time, preparation, like understanding, I think, and it's a wonderful way to live. But if you can't, look at food ingredients as you recognize them. So look at the side of the label, and if you recognize everything that's in it, if it's tomato puree and vinegar and caramel or honey, like if it's spices you recognize, then you're probably in good shape, even if there's 10 ingredients on there. If you can do less, because you can spice it up however you want to. That's another thing with the 5 ingredients or less. Just make it whatever you want to make it, right? But just try to recognize the ingredients. I think that's one of the big things, So.
I think another just quick thing to add, I was a single mom, career woman, and I used to take, I just remember growing up, and there were friends of mine when I was a child, and they would eat, oh my gosh, what was not macaroni and cheese, hamburger helper. And I remember we never ate anything like that. My mom actually made hamburger helper from scratch, and it would be some type of pasta, ground beef. She would boil fresh broccoli, a can of stewed tomatoes, and grate up some cheddar cheese. That was just a natural way to make it, and I didn't even make the connection until actually I was a mom making it, thinking well, that is something that's a healthier alternative. So I guess that's another way to kind of get away from some of these processed foods is macaroni and cheese or the chef or the hamburger helper or even the Chef Boyardee. A lot of these you can make on your own. So
simple ingredients, right? Because the hamburger helper in the box isn't helping anybody.
It isn't helping, no.
All right. Well, we are about 4 minutes after end, so we're going to wrap up today. But again, this is recorded, so we'll make that available shortly on the YouTube page, and we'll let you all know. But I want to thank you both. Thanks for September. It was a nice series, and we will let everyone know about the October event coming up soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.